It's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Blue Ox base plate on a 2013 Mini Cooper Clubman. Now this is what your base plate is going to look like when it's installed, and it does a really good job of maintaining still your vents and really tucking close to the grill, so it's pretty well hidden. You still maintain a really clean look overall. Now I did omit a slight difference of mounting my breakaway switch down here. Originally they want it mounted up in the grill, so I saved having to trim that out. I just think aesthetically it looks a lot better to just trim out the bottom, but it's really up to you. It does have a mounting point for your 6-pole wiring, which is really nice, and you do have your safety chain loops. Although they are pretty close to the grill, you'll still be able to get those attached. It's a pretty tight fit, and it is going to require trimming of the grill. You really can't get away from that unless you completely take out the grill, but overall I think it looks really good, and that's the main thing, is the finished product does its job and looks decent in the process. Now, going down the road, there's caps that they include that you can put into the receiver tube opening, and that'll keep it from getting any buildup of road grime or rust and corrosion. And then when you are ready to tow, it's super easy to just take your removable arms. You'll just push these in, and then this portion you just rotate, pushing in, and then it's going to lock in place. When you need to remove them, super easy, just pull the pin, give it a quick twist, and it's going to slide out. Minis really don't have much ground clearance from, out the factory, and the base plate does a good job of keeping it low, but just keep that in mind when hooking up. So from the bottom of the ground to the middle of our tabs, it's about 12.5 inches, and that's going to be important when trying to get your tow bar to be nice and level with your towed vehicle. So measure from the ground to the center of the hitch pin hole on the hitch on your RV, and the difference between that and the 12.5 inches is going to determine whether or not you need a high-low adapter. You want those two measurements within 3 inches of each other to keep the tow bar nice and level and have the car safely go down the road. So our neighbor today picked up a Curt high-low adapter, and this should put it nice and level. When you're ready to hook up to flat tow your Cooper, you're going to just simply get your tow bar in place, and this is a Blue Ox tow bar, so it's going to work well with this base plate. But not to worry, if you have a different brand tow bar that you want to use, you can pick that up and get adapters, or if you already have a used, say, Roadmaster or something along those lines, you can get the adapters to mount up to the base plate. And this one just lines up. We'll put our pins in place, and then our linch pins. Just like a trailer, we have our safety chains, and those are going to attach into our loops, and it is tight, but it actually worked out pretty well here. And then we also have our breakaway switch. Then we'll get our diode wiring, or tow bar wiring, hooked up. And then all we need to do is get our vehicle in flat tow mode, and we're ready to hit the road. When flat towing any car, including a Mini Cooper, there's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required to safely do it. And the first one's going to be on the vehicle side. The base plate attaches structurally to the vehicle, to the frame, and that's going to become the mounting point for the rest of your components, and mostly your tow bar, which is going to tow the vehicle down the road. Tow bar is going to be that connection point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now, going along with that base plate is safety chain loop attachments. So just like pulling a trailer, we have our safety cables that'll go from the base plate to the hitch on the RV. We also have a supplemental braking system, which is going to slow and stop the vehicle as you apply the brakes on the RV. And in case of a catastrophic disconnect, you have a breakaway switch. If this cable's pulled, it's going to apply the brakes, and that way it's not rolling down the highway. The vehicle is going to come to a stop. Now we also have diode wiring or tow bar wiring, and this is going to transmit the light signals and possibly a 12-volt charge line from the 7-pole on your RV to the 6-pole on your towed vehicle, and eventually to your taillights to give you your running lights, turn signals, and brake lights, keeping you safe and legal. When it comes to installing this base plate, it's really not that bad. A lot of the smaller cars are kind of the tricky ones, and this one's not that hard to do. The fascia comes off fairly easily, which you are going to have to do, and you're going to want to keep that off while you get the rest of your components in place. But really the base plate was pretty easy to do. There's a few small tight spots. There is going to be some drilling required, and I definitely set aside a couple hours to get this in place. And then once you get everything in place and you get your fascia put back on, there is going to be a little bit of trimming, and it really comes down to how clean do you want to make it. That could take a little bit of time. But if you're doing this at home, I'm going to walk you through step by step to make sure you get it installed. But if you watch the video and decide maybe this is beyond your scope, you don't have the place to do it, the tools to do it, or even the want to do it, you can use our dealer locator to find someone close to you to get your base plate installed. But if you're doing this yourself, follow along step by step. To get our base plate installed, we are going to be removing the front fascia to get it all bolted up. And the first step that we're going to be doing is pulling off our grille. And something that I'll point out for all of this installation, you're going to want to get a lot of your flat toe components set up while you have the fascia off. It'll make all the routing of wires and just mounting a lot easier. And with that being said, having a nice organized spot to keep all of your hardware will make it a lot easier when you go to reinstall everything. First thing we'll tackle is the front grille. We just have 4 plastic push pins. You can use a flathead screwdriver, but the plastic trim panel tool works really well here because you can pry that center portion off, and then you should be able to get behind the back portion and get this popped off. Just work your way along the front of the grill until you get all 4 removed. And if you're struggling to get that bottom one, you can just pry on the back side. That will work as well. Now there are going to be some clips that attach this in, so we're going to need to get those popped off. Now, there's also 4 clips on the lower side that we need to remove to get the grille completely taken off the vehicle. And as I peel this back lightly, you can see this arch-shaped clip, and that's what's holding it in. So if you reach in and just push one of the tabs in and then grab along this portion, and as we're pushing that tab and pulling back, we should be able to get this one removed, and then we can work our way down, and it'll make it a lot easier. It's tight here though. And once I get this taken out, I can show you what the clips look like, and it'll make it a lot easier for you. Oh, there we go. So these just press in, and it just snaps in. So if you can reach down there, and you'll see that these ones, if you push on the outside towards the middle, that'll get it released, and the opposite on the other side. So just work from your outside, pushing in, and then slide this off. We can set this aside for now. We'll need a T25 Torx bit, and we're going to get the 2 screws that are attaching the front fascia to our support here. This is also a time to check to see if you have washer squirter lines that go to your headlights. If you do, you're going to want to separate those and unplug them. They're going to be generally located on these tabs, so take a look and see if you have those. Now in the wheel wells, we're going to be removing 2 plastic push pins, and these ones have a Phillips style center. These are, you can see the one up here and down here. That Phillips is just a plastic screw that goes into the center, but it does help to get that center portion removed if you have a small ratcheting 1/4-inch drive here. If you need to, you can also hop in the vehicle and just put it in accessory mode and turn the steering wheel over, and that's going to give you a lot more room. But with that center portion lightly screwed out, you should be able to get that whole center portion out and then get the whole thing removed. So we'll get these taken out. Once you have those taken off, you can take your fender liner and just peel this back. You'll find that we have a plastic push pin that goes straight up, located right at the lower piece where it goes to wheel well trim here. And then there's an upper one that's located that goes out. So we'll get those removed. These are not a Phillips head style, so we're just going to try to pry those out just like we had on the grill. They're a little bit tricky to get out, but this is what it looks like. There is a slot. It looks like 2 of the sides, so if you can get a small flathead in there to wedge that out, it might make it a little bit easier. Your other option too is if you can push from the back side of the plastic push pin and push that center section down. Now, right above the plastic push pin, the top one that we removed, there's going to be a T25 screw. And it's going to be really tight to get, but what you can do is pop out this fender trim, and that's going to make it a little bit easier. So you can feel the tabs back here, and what you can do is just kind of pull back and then push those tabs in. And then this just kind of lifts out. I'm not going to pull it back all the way, but this will give us at least enough room to get to that T25. And then we'll just repeat on the other side. Underneath our fascia, we're going to need to remove 2 T25 screws, just as we had before. Well, there's one that's here and one on the other side. And as we go across, we're also going to find we have 3 plastic push pins. And on some newer models, I believe there's a cap that's hiding 3 more screws. We don't have that on ours today, so we can omit that. But we'll get this all taken down, and then we're going to get ready to pull our fascia off. So it might be a good time to find someone close by that can help you pull this off. Now, to remove the fascia is super easy. It should come off fairly simple, but we want to make sure that we have someone there to support it to get our electrical connections taken off. So I have Jesse here supporting it as we pull this back. And on both sides, it's looking like we have fog lamps that we need to separate. And there's going to be 2 plugs, it seems. So we'll pinch the sides here and get this popped off. And so those tabs are just here on the outside top edge. And then on this one, if we push back on the center portion, we can get that popped off. And then we can set our fascia aside safely. We need to make an access hole for eventually our nut plate for our base plate to mount up, and you'll find that there's already going to be a hole in the bumper beam, and that's going to be a great spot for us to use an 1.25" hole saw to be able to open that up. Now, if you don't have an 1.25" hole saw, you could get away using a step bit. Just make sure you go to an 1.25". That's going to be the size that we're looking for. So we'll get this drilled out. Once you get your hole made, you'll just repeat that same step on the other side. Now you're going to want to come back with some sort of cutting method, and I have a Dremel. You can use a reciprocating saw, anything to cut off this stud flush with the nut on the outside mounting point on the bumper beam, and we're going to be doing this on both sides. So get your safety glasses on, and we'll get this trimmed down. Before we get our base plate raised into position, we need to get our air ducts removed, and we're going to have to later trim these to make them fit. And some of them will bolt into the wheel well liner. It seems like mine might be missing a little bit of hardware here, but we can separate this to where it's not going to be feeding through the frame rail by just simply pulling back, and these tabs will allow you to pop that out. You can see those here, but that's going to give us the clearance to be able to get the base plate raised up, so we'll take these out on both sides. And we're going to get our hardware ready to go. That way when we raise the base plate up, we can get these started. But we want to make sure that we're putting Loctite on our threads so long term these don't become loose. So we'll get these coated with some red Loctite. And our hardware combination that we're going to be using is going to be a split washer and 2 flat washers on each. So it should look like this. These are the longer bolts. There should only be 2 of them in your kit. And these are going to feed into this opening right behind where we trimmed off that stud that we had. This is a weld nut. So as we raise this in position, we should have our bolts ready to go in there. And we're just going to get them hand tight on each side. That way it's supported. So we'll just slide this up. Grab your bolt. And that should get started. And to get this snug down, we're going to use a 13mm ratcheting wrench. You can also get a small short socket in here, which eventually we may need to do because once we get this tightened down, we are going to torque these to the manufacturer's recommendations. Now coming back with that torque wrench, we'll torque these down, and this is a really low torque setting, so it's mostly important on hardware that's not particularly tight to get the torque setting proper, because any more than that, you run the risk of causing damage to the hardware. Now this is a rather tight spot to get to, so you're going to have to do your best here. Now, if you need a torque wrench, you can get these available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store somewhere local to you, and that way you can rent one for free. But we're going to be using the torque wrench for pretty much the rest of the hardware from here on out, so this is definitely going to be an important tool to have. Now I've found that I can get away using a crow's foot attachment here because it's a pretty low torque setting. Normally you got to be careful with this on a torque wrench because those jaws will want to open up and sometimes you can round off or hurt your knuckles in the process. But this is, it's tricky here, but this will get us to that torque setting. Now, where we mounted that bolt into that weld nut, we're going to be drilling vertically up. There's another hole that's going to go into the bumper beam, and this is where that axis hole that we created with the hole saw or a step bit is going to allow us to pass the hardware up. And they recommend a 13/32 drill bit. Now, the trick that I'm finding here is even with a right angle drill, this is not a straight shot. Really, we just need to make a hole for our hardware to pass up. So if you wanted to, what you could do is drill a small hole. If you have a shorter bit, you might be better there. With a regular drill, you might be able to get this kind of at the same angle that I'm at right now. So the main thing is yeah, we have a clean hole that's drilled through there. So if you have to go back with a burr bit later on, by all means, go ahead and do that. But we'll start drilling this out. Now another option too, as we drill this out, you can use, if you're careful, you can use this drill bit. We should be able to draw this up and then just work it back to waller out that hole to where the hardware will pass through. And once drilled out, just do a quick check with your hardware to make sure you can pass that bolt up. So we are looking good here. We'll go ahead and drill out the other side. Now you may notice where we drilled out, there's also another hole that's tucked a little bit farther forward towards the vehicle, so we need to get that drilled out as well. For all 4 of the holes that we just drilled out, it's going to be the same step here. So we're going to grab the bolt with a split washer and that thread lock, and then we have our nut plates here. And what we can do is bend this to about a 90-degree angle, give or take, but we need enough space to where we can feed this in and line it up to those holes and get this threaded. So it may take some little bit of, patience and kind of working this around till you get it fully dialed in. But I found generally a 90-degree angle is a good way to do it. And if you're looking from the top, you can actually see the bolt and line that plate up. And something to consider is these nut plates are fairly wide, and we're going to have 2 of them. So we want to make sure that we're leaving space. So just if you have a chance to kind of orientate it to where you can get both loosely started, that's really what you're going to be looking for. So just make sure that we have the nut plate slid out of the way for that next one. And then when we tighten it, it's not going to become an issue. And with our first one in place, we'll just repeat the same step on the other hole, and then we'll do the same on the other side. Right now, we're just going to be hand tighten them on. Now we'll take a 9/16 socket and adjust your torque wrench to the torque setting for your hardware. And we'll get these torqued down properly. With the extra tabs here on our nut plates, what you can do is if you just move them back and forth, a lot of times that'll knock off that weld that's on there. Sometimes you need to get a little aggressive with it, but it should get looser as you do this. You can also just take a pair of snips and just cut it below the hole that we drilled. That way it's not popping out. Or even if you cut it at the top and bend it in, whatever works best. I will recommend though, because we are going to be drilling in the side and putting nut plates there, to try to get these to pop off is just going to give us a little bit more space. Now these did fight me for a little, and it really depends. Some nut plates I've been able to get off fairly easily, but what I did was with a light, I could see exactly where they met on that plate, and I just took a flathead and pinched it and then hammered down, and eventually that broke them off nice and clean. We're just going to be drilling out the side holes into our beam, and we're going to do the exact same steps with the exact same hardware, so we'll get that taken care of. And just like before, we'll make sure that we get these torqued down properly. Now that all of that hardware is tightened down in place, we do want to make sure this doesn't turn to rust and corrosion long term, being that it is raw exposed metal. So a little bit of spray paint just to coat that up. And then once that dries, I'm going to take some tape and just cover that, something that can hold up to water long term. That way we don't get any water in our bumper beam. While we're waiting for our paint to dry, grab a 13mm socket, and we're going to remove the top bumper bolt. and we're going to be putting the blocks that are supplied. These are just going to be a reinforcement because we're putting a lot of stress on the bumper beam as a structural support. We want to just make sure that all of our mounting points are going to be heavy duty enough to obviously tow our vehicle down the road. So once you get this taken off, we'll grab our block and we're going to just put this in place and then tighten it back down. One of the last and final things that we'll need to do is get our safety cables attached to our base plate and wrapped around the frame. And this is in case, all of our hardware was to fail. We still have a cable that's holding that base plate structurally onto the frame. So the best way I've found to do this is our quick link is going to use this spot, loop this underneath, and we got to remember that we have our air ducts that'll go back in place. So making sure that we don't cause any interference with that is going to be key. So if I kind of route this up, the AC lines are pretty tight here, so what I'll do is as I get this passed in, I might make a few loops to take away some of that slack, and it is tight here. So what I did is I just wrapped around this beam and then came out right in front of the intercooler, and I think this is going to be a good spot to where we can get away with one quick link and get this attached. Now, if you need to, you can use the 2 quick links that are included in the kit to extend it, to make it fit a little bit better. But once you have this in place, I do recommend any loose cable that you have, you can zip tie that up to where it's tight. Again, this is just for last line of defense. So we want to make sure mostly that it's not going to cause any issue with anything with the vehicle, and also fitment of getting everything back in place. So if you need to, you can go ahead and zip tie that up. We'll repeat the same step on the other side. Now I mentioned zip tying up these cables, and especially on the passenger side, you can see this belt is not far away from it. So making sure that we have this in place to where it's not going to move, that way we don't have any interference with the belt, is definitely a step that you're going to want to do. Something that's also included, which is a nice thought, is going to be this bracket for a breakaway switch. But strangely enough, they put it in this position here, and they give you the hardware, and you just bend the tab up, which is pretty normal on a breakaway switch to get it mounted up properly on something structural. But with that being said, this is where your upper grille is going to be, and so you're going to be cutting into that. And I honestly think that I can make it a little bit cleaner looking down here, possibly using this bracket still. But at this point, I'm going to get all of my flat toe components set up and mount it up, and then when we go to trim the fascia and put it back on, I'll show you what I came up with. I'm really going to try my best to omit mounting it up top. And the instructions lay out that you chop off this portion up to this flange, and I don't really agree with that, because in order for it to snap in, I did have to cut a little bit further back, and our attachment point also needs to come off. So we'll start by getting this portion trimmed off. And it's also tight along here, so I'm going to just run my blade along and kind of get this molded portion cut down a little bit more flat. And on the top, I cut out this section first and then test fit it. Yours may be a little bit different, but I found that I had to go pretty far up here. So it's not the cleanest looking thing, but we can get this put back in place once we trim it out. So I would maybe start right at that flange, test fit yours, and if you need to, you can always cut off more. And it's still pretty tight to get the clips in and aligned, so you may need to have some force. I wouldn't attach that back portion to the fender liner quite yet, because if you can pull on it to get these to snap together, that's going to be the ticket. And the instructions are also going to tell you that you need to relocate your thermostat or ambient air temperature sensor. Ours was broken, the tab originally, so it was already hanging down. So I'm just going to mock this up. This is still going to pull temperature and be accurate. We also need to make room on the back side of our fascia to clear our base plate. And I've marked this out with a paint pen. It's just this kind of structural support here right around that vent in the front. And we'll just cut this out, and we'll repeat on the other side. With With our fascia trim, we're about ready to mock it up to be able to cut out the grill. And I mentioned that I wasn't very happy with the upper grill being trimmed for our breakaway switch. So I used the mount still, and I just drilled a hole and sourced some hardware. I stacked a few washers up here to make sure the clearance is there. So it should sit right at the bottom of the grill, nice and clean. If I'm a little off, I could always add a little spacers, or I can just kind of bend this up slightly. But I think overall it's going to look clean. So you might want to grab an extra set of hands. We're going to grab our fascia and get it aligned with some of the factory mounting points to flush this up as close as we can, and have a paint marker ready because we're going to trim the grill as we go, and we want to be able to mark out those spots. So a good guide, if you can mock up these top mounting holes, you're going to want to press this against the grill, and that's going to really point out exactly where we need to trim. It might be a little skewed just because of the angle, but it's going to get us pretty close. I see right away that my breakaway switch, more than likely I'll have to stack that up a little bit higher, but I can start marking out where our 6-pole as well as our arms are going to be, and that way we can cut out the grill. So I ended up stacking this up quite a bit higher with washers. It's very solid. I could probably pull myself up on this, so that's the main thing. And I think a good rule of thumb, I haven't for sure test fit it, but I think it's going to work, is the top portion of our breakaway switch is about in line with the center of our 6-pole mounting bracket. So we're going to try that out, and then I'll get everything cut out and see how it fits. I loosely put in the hardware up top. I had enough space to be able to do that, and generally for a nice clean fit on here, what I try to do is work with what's touching first, and then as you trim, it'll slowly draw in and make it a lot cleaner. So the first thing we have is our breakaway switch. It is going to be enough to where I can get that in place. So you can use really any cutting method, but honestly just a pair of side cutters or snips is enough to go through this plastic to really get it trimmed out, and you can make quick adjustments here, and you're not having to risk making damage with a powered blade or anything like that. And if you do use a powered blade to cut this bottom portion, it's going to be easiest to use my multi-tool. I'm just going to pull the fascia back a little bit so it's not rubbing right against the breakaway switch when I do this. Next, we'll work on our safety chain loops, so we'll get that cut out. I got this all trimmed out to where it's going to fit. This top corner, you're really going to want to just notch this out for that receiver opening, and then just kind of work with the grill as you go for your safety chain loops. Breakaway switch, as I mentioned, this is going to work with that bracket, and these tabs for our 6-pole, I was able to kind of slide them through, but I ended up cutting out because the boot of the plug does need a spot to feed in, so I may actually have to go a little bit more here, but overall this is about where you want to cut. So just take your time, and if there's any burrs that are going to bother you long term, just go through with a file and notch those down so it gives it a nice clean look. At this point, you're ready to really get your fascia put back in the reverse order. Just make sure that you're plugging in all your electrical connections, which are going to be your fog lamps, and really from there it's just the reverse steps to get it back in place. And that was a look and installation of the Blue Ox base plate on a 2013 Mini Cooper Clubman.